And as I've extended a welcome to you, so we all extend a warm welcome to newcomers here in East Lothian. But we also must learn lessons from our past and meet any challenges with considered and appropriate partnering through engagement to make the places that our communities want to be and to put communities at the heart of those developments so that communities can share in the planning of any future expansion and create economic growth, prosperity and address poverty. You'll hear many more concerns today about what East Lothian faces. But personally, as a firm believer in experiencing East Lothian and the strength of the empirical evidence around all we have to offer, can I just say that if you were unable to visit very much today, then can I invite you please to return, I'll even buy you a coffee, and enjoy what our towns and villages have to offer from the coast to the hills in this unique, our part of Scotland, East Lothian. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I was a wee bit taken aback there. I thought the Provost was going to introduce me there, so I just thought I would take the stage anyway. So my name's George Adam. I'm the Minister for Parliamentary Business and I'll be acting as your compere here today. And the Cabinet is delighted to be here. This is the first time that this Government has held a Cabinet meeting in East Lothian. This is our second travelling Cabinet this year, following our meeting in Inverary in October. It is also the 52nd time the Cabinet has been on the road since 2008. Taking the opportunity to hear directly from thousands of people in towns and cities across Scotland. East Lothian, as your Provost has already said, is a beautiful part of the country, and the Ministers have been out and about today seeing everything it has to offer. The Cabinet has already been very busy. The First Minister, accompanied by the Cabinet Secretary for Rural Affairs, Land Reform and Islands, visited the Community Bakery, the Community Carrot and the Ridge in Dunbar, and saw and heard about local people making a difference in their own communities. I'll let the First Minister speak about that in more detail later on. Ministers have also undertaken a range of visits across East Lothian today. The Deputy First Minister visited Amonsfield Walled Garden. The Cabinet Secretary for Wellbeing, Economy and Fair Work and Energy visited Archerfield. The Cabinet Secretary for Education and Skills visited Walliford Learning Campus. And the Cabinet Secretary for NHS Recovery, Health and Social Care visited Roodlands Hospital. The Cabinet Secretary for Constitution, External Affairs and Culture visited Tallinn Castle. And the Minister for Victims and Community Safety visited the East Lothian Community Action Team and Anti-Social Behaviour Team. And I'm nearly finished now before I've lost you all. The Minister for Green Skills, Circular Economy and Biodiversity visited Countryside Ranger Service in Musselburgh. And I, of course, enjoyed my own visit to Knox Academy here in Haddington, where I had the opportunity to speak to many of the young people in the Modern Studies class. And I'll need to apologise to the Provost and some of his council officials. I managed to explain to them how the council budget works, and possibly they should make some representations themselves if there were certain things that they want to do. So apologies to those in East Lothian Council for that. Following all these visits, Ministers held a formal Cabinet meeting in John Muir House before coming here to hear from you all today. The main purpose of this event, however, is to hear from you, and we very much look forward to listening to your views and answering all the questions and local issues and national issues about the work of the Scottish Government. I'll introduce the First Minister in a moment so he can say more about what the Government is doing to support communities in East Lothian and to create a fairer, more prosperous Scotland. Then I'll open the floor to take your questions for about an hour. Following that, you hope you'll join us for refreshments and the opportunity to continue the discussion in a more informal manner. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, will you please welcome the First Minister of Scotland, Humza Yousaf.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you, everybody, for that warm welcome. Thank you, George. And, of course, thank you, John, for such a kind introduction. And can I say what an excellent day we've had already. As George had explained in his introduction, Mary Goujon and I had the pleasure of being in Dunbar High Street. We visited Crunchy Carrot, visited the excellent Dunbar Community Bakery, and saw the fantastic work of the Ridge. And I have to say I'm very pleased to be going back up the road to my family with a selection of goodies from the bakery. Good because that is, of course, what should be done when you go to an excellent bakery. But also, if my wife had watched the news and seen me at a bakery and I came home empty-handed, it would have been absolute curtains for me. So I'm really pleased to be able to have ensured that we supported the local economy in Dunbar. So we're really pleased here to be at first travelling cabinet to take place in East Lothian. And as I mentioned, many of my colleagues and George gave an outline of how many of my colleagues have visited right across East Lothian excellent projects that we are delighted to have supported ourselves. You heard a moment ago from George and from myself, of course, where I was this morning, excellent projects that we visited. And what I was really pleased about was they demonstrated Scottish Government and indeed our partners in local government working really collaboratively and closely together. Many of the projects, in fact all of them that I visited this morning, had some funding from the Scottish Land Fund, which meant that those businesses, those enterprises could remain within local community ownership, and they were really effusive in their praise of the support they'd also received from my colleagues in local government as well. You heard the Deputy First Minister was at Amisfield Walled Garden, learning about the incredible community garden that is producing food for local people. Health Secretary at the new dedicated orthopaedic rehabilitation ward in East Lothian Community Hospital. Jenny, the Education Secretary, saw the amazing work taking place at the Rosehill High School at the Walliford Learning Campus. From Kinweir Recycling Centre to our community kitchen, of course, right here in Haddington, we've seen very much firsthand the incredible work taking place in and across East Lothian, and which is, of course, absolutely vital to that excellent work our communities, many of them represented here in the audience today. And then, again, as you heard, we held our cabinet meeting here in Haddington and had the opportunities to meet the leader, deputy leader, and the leader of the SNP group here in East Lothian Council, alongside the chief executive, and a really productive conversation was had. There's no getting away from the difficulty of the circumstances we face. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I think it's always better that we are upfront and honest with people about the scale of the challenge that we're facing. We've seen an unprecedented cost of living crisis. Many of you suffer as a result of that unprecedented cost of living crisis. The disaster of the mini budget, which saw inflation skyrocket, your energy prices skyrocket, of course, the damage of Brexit. And then there is the significant challenges of probably the biggest existential threat that we all face in relation to climate change and the climate crisis. And of course, the recent damage to North Berwick, providing a stark reminder of the real-world damage that is caused by the climate crisis. So that's why it was heartening for us to be able to hear about the incredible work being done to support communities right across East Lothian. I heard, for example, from Crunchy Carrot, the incredible work that they did during the pandemic to provide emergency food to people who couldn't get delivery of food from traditional supermarkets at the time. So we're delighted to be here in East Lothian. It's got a long and proud history here in Scotland. Many of you, of course, know that the birthplace of Scotland's national flag is less than a few miles away in Athol Standerford, and of course, as well as playing an important role in our history, in Scotland's history, East Lothian represents what is currently great about our nation as well. From the incredible produce from farming and fishing, right the way through to your stunning scenery and coastline. East Lothian has much to share with the world, and in turn Scotland has much to learn from listening to the people who live here. From the leading lights of educational equality like Eleanor Sidgwick, right the way through to, of course, the Women's British Open champion and Solheim Cup legend, Katrina Matthew. The people of East Lothian are pretty special, if I do say so myself. I actually heard the story today that apparently, the late and great Sir Sean Connery spent some time as a joiner here in Haddington in the 1950s. There can't be many places that claim 007 as their local handyman. And perhaps the most famous of East Lothian's sons, John Muir, too. And as we seek to fight the catastrophe of the climate crisis, I think the example of John Muir in relation to wildlife preservation is more important now than it ever has been before. And I was myself at COP28, which closes tomorrow, most of last week, and Mary McCallan was also there last week. And there is, an importance that Scotland can provide in terms of leadership in relation to tackling the climate crisis. This is the biggest existential threat that we all face. I'm delighted that we have a number of young people in the audience today from Preston Lodge High School, also from North Berwick High School as well. And our young people are undoubtedly on the on the right side of the debate. And unfortunately, many of us are on the wrong side of the debate when it comes to the climate crisis. And we have been pushed further and further and further by our young people. Our young people are the ones who are leading the light in relation to the climate crisis. And I can see some of them already perhaps making their point known in that regard. So we look forward to listening to all of the people who are here, particularly our young people, but we'll make sure everybody gets a chance to be able to contribute today. In terms of our own priorities, I won't take up too much more time at all, but you will have heard from the government, I'm sure, about our defining missions. At the heart of our defining mission is opportunity, and my goodness, East Lothian has huge amounts of opportunity and potential. We talk about the population growth in East Lothian, and I know that presents challenges. There's no doubt about that in terms of public services, perhaps in house prices and schooling. We spoke about much of those challenges with our colleagues in East Lothian Council. But so too is there a massive opportunity there to be unlocked and to be unleashed, and the Scottish Government looks forward to working with colleagues in East Lothian in relation to opportunity. And when I think about the opportunity that comes from unlocking the potential of renewables, onshore and offshore wind in particular, then East Lothian is incredibly well placed to do that. The other one of our defining missions is equality. Working towards greater equality is another one of the government's key missions, and that has to be tackling poverty at the very root and providing high-quality public services. We have, as I've already said, had extremely strong headwinds our way. Headwinds of austerity, over a decade and a half of UK austerity. We've had difficulties in relation to the most recent autumn statement, which independent analysts have suggested means austerity worse, more difficult, deeper than we've ever seen before. So the Deputy First Minister, Finance Secretary, will lay out, of course, our priorities in that regard next week. But I don't think I'm giving away any secrets when I say this government will always seek to tackle the cost of living crisis, to protect people from harm, and to protect our public services where we can. And the last point I'd make is around community. For me, we have to take care of our people, because our people are our communities. And we have to make sure they're paid fairly. And I make no apologies whatsoever of ensuring that those that we have control, where we have control over pay, that we make sure that people are paid fairly. That, of course, comes at a cost. We have to be, again, upfront and honest about the cost of that. But it will be really important that we fund local government, and that was a point made by my colleagues in local government at our meeting earlier on, and important we provide funding for our central public services. And again, I'll make no apology for the fact that in Scotland we have a tax system where people who earn more, like the politicians on this stage, pay more for our public services, and I think that's absolutely the right thing to do. Let me end by saying, first of all, thank you for your patience for listening to what I have to say, because the most important part of this public meeting is all my colleagues on the stage and I listening to what you have to say. And that is the entire purpose of Travelling Cabinet. We don't vet the questions, we don't screen the questions, we don't check who you are before you come in the room. We want this to be a genuinely open forum. You can be absolutely robust in the questions that you've got. Let's keep it respectful. I think that's fair enough to say. But afterwards, If you feel like you want to take the conversation further, you want to speak to me or indeed any of my Cabinet colleagues, we will all be there for refreshments later on. So don't feel that the conversation will be curtailed. If you don't feel like asking a question in a packed room like this and you want to seek us out privately in that refreshment, when we're having refreshments, please do that too. You are most welcome here. You're most welcome to put your challenge to us, to put your questions to us. But I've made it clear since I've been First Minister, and I know this was true of my predecessors before me, that we don't, as a government, simply want to sit in Edinburgh, in St Andrew's House, in Parliament, making decisions. Of course, we seek to engage with our communities right across Scotland. So whether you agree with us, disagree with us, or a bit of both, as it tends to be for most people, I hope there is a genuine understanding and reassurance that you can gain from the fact that we intend to listen to you, hear from you, and have a really upfront and open conversation with you. Thank you very much for your time. I look forward to your questions.
Right, now to get on to the important part, which is the questions. But first, can I take the opportunity to introduce those here in the Cabinet? Right from the front row, from left to right, we have Mary McAllen, who is the Cabinet Secretary for Transport, Net Zero and Just Transition. Next to her, we have the Deputy First Minister and Cabinet Secretary for Finance, and also my boss, Shona Robertson. Next to that, we have First Minister Humza Yousaf.
I was your boss.
You're the ultimate boss. You're the boss of bosses. But basically, after that, we have Neil Gray, Cabinet Secretary for Wellbeing, Economy, Fair Work and Energy. And then in the in the second row, we have Mary Goujon for Cabinet Secretary for Rural Affairs and Land Reform. We have Shirley Ann Somerville, the Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice. And we also have Angus Robertson, Cabinet Secretary for Constitution, External Affairs and Culture. And Jenny Goruth, Cabinet Secretary for Education and Skills. And Lorna Slater, the Minister for Green Skills, Circular Economy and Biodiversity, and Siobhan Brown, Minister for Victims and Community Safety, and Michael Matheson's Cabinet Secretary for NHS Recovery, Health and Social Care, here at the front, so that I can probably just get him quite closely. He says he's going to fling things at me when I get boring. So with all that, we should move on to the questions, of which we have, I'm going to take them in batches of 3, and the questions aren't, as the First Minister says, aren't vetted, aren't checked beforehand, but I think you'll understand, because we have a number of young people from certain schools in here today, I'd like to ask them to ask their questions first. So if we can have Amy and, I'm trying to see what the second name is there, Amy from Berwick High School. You're on stage right here somewhere, so can you ask your question? We'll get the microphone over to you.
Will the through-care aftercare system be adapted so that it supports the child more during the transition when they're going into university?
Okay then, and we'll also take one from Preston Lodge, and it's Preston Lodge, is it? We know who it is? I'm glad someone knows what we're doing. Okay then, if you can ask your question.
Given the current cost of living crisis, the prices of student accommodation are still really high. What are the Scottish Government doing to try and combat that? And is there any probability of like a cap on student rent prices?
Okay, after saying I'll take 3 questions at a go, I'll change my rules at this stage and just go to the First Minister with the first 2 questions. First Minister.
Thank you very much to both of you. Can I get the name of the second person? Eve. Neve. Thank you so much for asking your questions. Look, I'll hand over to my colleagues, Cabinet Secretary for Education, who wish to speak on the first point. In terms of, and then we'll also go to colleagues in relation to housing, in relation to the second point as well, but Education Secretary might wish to say something. So for us, first and foremost, supporting our young people throughout all stages of their journey is really important. For us, that transition to adulthood, whether that's university, whether that's college, whether that's into employment, for us is really important. It's why we provide some of the best student support and the most generous student support anywhere in the UK. It's why we took the decision really early on as a government to abolish tuition fees, so that, again, We lowered the burden of student debt on our young people as well. And it's why I was really pleased just a few weeks ago to announce for our young people who are care experienced the plans to provide a care leavers payment as well. So again, when that transition happens from childhood into adulthood, that we are providing some support. But I'll come to the Cabinet Secretary very shortly. On the cost of living crisis, first and foremost, to Niamh's point, we will do everything we possibly can to try to protect people from the harm of a cost of living crisis. Because nobody in this room, I include the Scottish Government in that, but more so the people of Scotland, nobody in this room contributed to the cost of living crisis, but almost everybody in this room in the Scottish public and households right across the country are suffering the effects of the cost of living crisis. So we've got a real job to try to do to help where we can. It's why we have brought in rent controls, and we're of course seeking to ensure that we have a long-term system of rent control that helps those in the rental market, and making sure we get the balance right between ensuring investment comes into housing and at the same time having those rent controls. And we of course had emergency rent controls throughout the course of much of the pandemic, and they still remain in place until March of next year. I suppose the other thing we're seeking to do is build affordable housing. So we've got a really good track record on building housing, over 120,000 houses built in our time in office, and we're looking to build 110,000 houses up to 2032, I think. And we're making good progress in that regard. So the more houses we can build, make sure they're affordable, the better chance and opportunity there is, not just for student accommodation, but for, of course, when you seek to buy your own home, to make sure it is affordable. But I'll maybe go to Jenny in the first instance around education, if it is you, Jenny, and then I can go to... Promise. Yeah, you can touch on the promise, and I don't know whether or not anybody else wants to come in housing, like Shirley-Ann.
Minister. So, Amy, to your question, I was a teacher before I was a politician. I think it's really important that our school system better joins up with those transitions after school education, and we're really focused on all that we can do, particularly that transition that the First Minister mentioned between childhood into adulthood. We debated this actually very recently in the Chamber, and my junior minister, Natalie Dawn, will be taking forward action on this in the coming months. We already support through the school system additionality through the Attainment Challenge, and actually recently, in the last couple of years, we've focused some of that funding, particularly on care experienced young people. And I know in East Lothian, actually, this year, we're employing a virtual head teacher to help support some of that work, particularly for our care experienced young people who can really struggle in terms of accessing the curriculum. And there have been a number of challenges here since the pandemic. We know in terms of challenges with attendance, with engagement with school. For care experienced young people, it's really important we think at different ways, we look at different ways in which we can engage them with school education. And through doing that, better support that transition into adulthood and beyond, I think is hugely important. I'm actually recused from the promise. Of course, the DFM leads on that work, so I'll defer to her in that respect because my wife sits on the board of the promise.
Yeah, Sharon, do you want to come in on that, and then maybe Shirley-Ann on anything around housing?
Yeah, I just also noticed that we have the Housing Minister, Paul McClellan, here, who's a local MSP, so he'll be available later, I'm sure, to talk about some of these issues in more detail. I don't want to say an awful lot more other than that the promise is really, really important to our government. It is a promise to improve the position for care leavers throughout their whole journey, and that through care, that transition period that I think you were referring to, Amy, is so important. And First Minister referred to the care leaver payment. That's just one element of a range of supports that we're giving in recognition that we have a duty to support care leavers, to make sure that the disadvantages that you can see that have been unfortunately held care leavers back for many years, that we have to address those so that they have the same life chances as anyone else. So that the promise and holding ourselves to account for the promise is a really, really important part of government, and happy to speak to you further about it later if that would be helpful.
Great. Shirley, anything you want to add?
Thanks, FM. I'll be very brief. Firstly, also to give a shout out to my junior minister colleague Paul McClellan, who you'll, I'm sure, know as your local MSP, who's brought that same enthusiasm to government since joining. The FM's already discussed what's happening with private rented sector, but specifically around student accommodation. Totally appreciate there is a real challenge around student accommodation, which is why there's been a review into that to see what more can be done. Clearly, the vast majority of that is private, or indeed it's held by the universities, so we have to work very closely with our colleagues in the university sector and the private providers on that, because I appreciate there are challenges in that. But the wider aspect of the cost of living, whether it's a student or whether it's anyone else in the population, we really have an obligation to make sure that we're there for people at the toughest of times. But that's exactly why we're providing around £3 billion worth of support this year and last year to protect people as best we can from the worst excesses of the cost of living crisis. And that's a very important commitment that we have in mind, of course, as we go through the budget process that we're currently going through, and the Deputy First Minister will publish soon. But that specific aspect around university and student accommodation is something we are giving serious consideration to seeing what we can work with partners on.
Okay, with that, we'll move on to people putting their hands up. As I said, I'll take 3 questions at a time. If you state your name and then ask your question and wait for the microphone to get to you, we'll take it from there then. So can people put their hands up, please? Gentleman up the back, I'll take you first, on the left-hand side.
Hello, my name is Balfour Stewart. I'm the destination leader for Scottish agronomy in the Lothians. And at present, our members are having terrible delays in all our planning applications for all our new ventures. So we've got delays, non-communication and non-understanding. Would it not be possible then for the Scottish Government to assist us and meet with the planners so that Scottish agritourism could be understood better? We can't expand properly or quickly enough without the help of the government and the planning departments.
Okay, can I take another 2 questions? Maybe one from this side. The woman there, just on the right-hand side. Just, yeah, right at the end of that row.
Thank you. My name's Jackie Bell, and I live in Dunbar. That one of the things that's already been mentioned is about the need to move to a low-carbon economy, the importance of renewables. However, East Lothian is now seeing an absolute plethora of energy developments coming forward. If you go to the little village of Innerwick, you will see that every time it rains, there's more planning applications coming in. The latest flavour of the month is battery energy storage systems, or BESS. The community are feeling really overwhelmed. Real concerns about how many things are coming to such a small area, the impact on the road system, for all the construction projects coming forward around the same time, also at the same time as the decommissioning of Torness. It's not just the pressure on the local roads, it's the pressure on the A1. There's so many still dangerous junctions on the A1, which has needed upgraded for a long time. And with all these projects coming forward, where are the workers going to go? That people are feeling a bit disempowered because many of these big projects are taken forward by the consents programme centrally rather than by the local council. And so the concern is, how can the community feel that they're being heard and feel that they are empowered? And I know I will give credit to Paul McLennan in that he has had various meetings about this, but how can we ensure that the planning system works in a joined-up way, whereas at the moment everything is piecemeal, every planning application is looked at individually rather than the whole big picture. Thank you.
And can we pass the microphone over to the woman with the green jacket on the left-hand side there, just because she had her hand up.
McMaitland, shop owner, North Berwick. Scottish Government says it's committed to supporting small business. Are you aware that our high streets in East Lothian face a massive threat by the introduction of parking charges to all our towns? The fact is that this has destroyed high streets up and down the UK. Shops, restaurants and cafes close, antisocial behaviour occurs, the well-being of communities disappears, not forgetting the loss of valuable business rates to cash-strapped councils. The very councillors we voted in do not believe we have a case and have voted for the proposals. If this charge parking goes ahead, there'll be no crunchy carrot to go and get your goodies. There'll be no bakery. The cafes will close. It's a very serious threat to our high streets. What is your opinion, and why should we, as business owners, vote SNP?
Well, you haven't disappointed East Lothian with these questions there. Balfour Stewart asked about planning system for agritourism. Jackie Bell was talking about the energy development, but also community empowerment plus infrastructure in the area as well. And the last question from Ms Maitland was regarding shop owners and high street parking charges, retail and council charges for parking. So
thanks.
Take it away, First Minister.
Yeah, I'm going to pass on, obviously, to Cabinet Secretaries to go into some of the detail on each of these issues, but let me say on Balfour's point that it's so important that we get the balance right. We've got to make sure that we have an appropriate planning system in place that meets our requirements in relation to, this is a point that Jackie made, in relation to net zero, in relation to growing the economy and not stifling the economy. And if there's a concern around that, then we're more than happy. If there's particular issues around agritourism, Balfour, more than happy to pick these up with you, perhaps when we're having refreshments in a minute. What we don't want to do is delay unnecessarily growth development by any stretch of the imagination. We want to encourage it. We want to foster it where we can. And it's concerning to hear what you have to say around the agritourism side of things. So I'll come to Shona and Mary Goujon, who might want to add to that in a minute. On Jackie's points, again, look, our real desire is to make sure that we don't lose the opportunity of the transition to net zero. We know that Scotland has, of course, for decades been the kind of oil and gas capital, and Aberdeen in particular, the oil and gas capital of Europe for decades, and that's come with huge growth, huge job potential and job opportunity. We want to transition and make sure that as we transition, we really get that opportunity from offshore, onshore wind and other sources of renewable technology as well. But you're absolutely right, you can't do that to the detriment of local communities, transport and infrastructure. And it's actually why the Cabinet Secretary, to my right, Mary, who I'll bring in shortly, has got responsibility for net zero, but also responsibility for transport as well. So I'll come to her to give more detail. But we want to make sure that when we are investing in renewables, the community actually sees the benefit of it. What we don't want to do is just the value, the profit of that renewable opportunity isn't felt at all by the community. That's a wrong model that we don't want to foster here. In terms of the final question that was asked, again, I'll go to colleagues shortly. But what I would say is, look, ultimately, there's a challenge here for us in the Scottish Government. We are doing our best to give as much flexibility to local government, not to decide to tell local government, whether it's East Lothian, whether it's Highland Council, whether it's Shetland Council, whichever local authority it possibly is. We don't want to overstep and say, actually, we should be telling you what you should be doing in your local roads or what you should be doing in terms of your local decision-making. We do our best to give as much flexibility around the autonomous decisions. I mean, it wouldn't be, I think, the best thing for Scottish Government to determine which local roads has a car parking charge or not. What our expectation of local partners would be that they engage, they consult and they listen. Now, if that's not happening, then clearly we want to hear that, but clearly your councillors will want to hear that, and they're sitting here in the front row as well. In terms of what has the SNP done in terms of business? Our small business bonus scheme has effectively taken about 100,000 businesses, small businesses, out of rates relief altogether. We've done things like frozen the poundage, for example. There'll be more announcements around what we'll be doing in about a week's time when Shona stands up and delivers budget. Like, I'm the son of a small business owner myself. My dad's had his small accountancy firm in the south side of Glasgow for over 40 years. So what we don't want to do is see local decisions, planning or otherwise, have a detrimental impact on local businesses. I think the points you've made are really well made, and we're happy after this to take more detail. Can I go to Shona, and Mary Goujon might wish to come in as well on Balfour's points, and I think Mary McCallan to Jackie's points, and then perhaps Neil in relation to the point in relation to small businesses. But Shona, do you want to come in first and foremost?
Just briefly, Balfour, I've visited a number of agri-tourism businesses recently, and I attended a conference in Perth, and I think the sector has huge potential to grow across Scotland. It's a very exciting sector. The planning issue is one I think we recognise that part of it is quite often about capacity of local planning departments, an issue that's been raised by a number of local authorities, that there's issues around the skill gap, that there's everybody's fishing in quite a small pond for those skills to recruit, and there's a lot of activity that is putting pressure on planning departments. So the Minister, one of our team, Minister Joe Fitzpatrick, is looking at what we can do to help with that, and working with COSLA, it represents local government, to look at how we manage to support all the sectors across Scotland in being able to make sure that going forward that we look at the gaps that there are within the planning system. And local authorities themselves have come up with some quite innovative solutions too. So, you know, we are aware of it, and it's an important issue for us to try and resolve going forward.
Mary, anything to add in particular on the agri-tourism front?
Yeah, thanks, First Minister. And I'm actually delighted that agri-tourism is one of the first topics that's been raised, because like the Deputy First Minister, I would absolutely agree. I think it is such an exciting sector, one where there is huge potential growth in Scotland, and where it can really add value to farm businesses, as well as doing so many other important things, like better connecting people to their food and knowing about where food comes from. So I think in terms of the issues that you raised, though, in relation to planning, there are issues that I absolutely recognise and been raised with me before. And I think it's also that bit about the understanding of what agri-tourism is, the exact point that you raised. I think it was really positive in May this year that, well, I think it was May that was Agri-Tourism Month, where especially, well, I noticed it in my local area, there was a lot of invitations from agri-tourism businesses inviting local elected representatives out onto the farms to learn more about that work. I think that kind of engagement is really important, first of all, because it raises the profile, but I think it does also do that other part of really getting that better understanding of what the industry is, what it's about, and just how diverse it is, and some of the issues that are involved in that too. But another key thing is that I co-chair an agri-tourism board with Caroline Miller, where we have a strategy for agri-tourism, and it's really about how we drive forward the actions that are within that too. We have planning representation that sits on that, and it's been really good because we also identify other issues where it can come down to, especially with different local authorities, different interpretation of guidance that we have in particular areas too. So it's really to try and work through some of these issues. So that is work in progress, but I would just say that I would want to give you comfort that we absolutely recognise the issue that you've raised, but we are working on that and trying to improve that.
Great. Can I go to Mary McCallan on Jackie's question? Neil might want to come in on that, and the final question too.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, First Minister, and thank you, Jackie, for your question. I think what's a helpful starting point is if we're all coming from the same understanding from the outset, which is that, sadly, you know, we wouldn't want it to be the case, but climate change and nature loss, as the First Minister says, are two of the biggest issues that we face here in Scotland and that we're facing throughout the world. And we have to be prepared to take action which is aligned with the scale of that challenge. And one of the main ways that we're going to have to do that is an energy transition, moving from the traditional ways that we produced our energy to cleaner and greener ways. And of course, we're very fortunate in Scotland that we have a huge opportunity both to move into so many ways of producing the clean energy that we need of the future. But I think your question's really important because, frankly, it could have been asked to me on a constituency level. I represent an area in South Lanarkshire, and it reminds me a lot of East Lothian, whereby we have a lot of traditional industry either still operating or shut down in recent decades, but is now a bit of a focal point for onshore wind developments and other forms of new industry. So I think there's really 2 points to my answer. One is that we do need to make that transition, but it must be done hand in hand with communities. And that means meaningful engagement on the location, the scale of the development, whatever it may be, with really robust engagement with communities through the planning process, but equally communities benefiting from that. So, I know in the areas that I represent that there are funds which flow from, for example, onshore wind, which are rejuvenating local areas that I represent. Equally, I'm seeing increasingly local groups coming together and having an ownership stake in renewable developments. The First Minister mentioned that my title in his government puts climate change and transport together, but it also puts climate change and just transition together for the first time. And I think that's really instructive that the First Minister set that out, because it's on the one hand us saying we will be a government who help the country to respond to the crisis of climate change, but equally putting that side by side with just transition means that our people will be taken with us, we will make sure it's fair, we will do everything we can to avoid some of the unfairness which was so characteristic of transitions of the past, for example, when the coal mines in my constituency were shut down. So if I can assure you of 2 things, it's that this government wants to fight climate change, but we want to do it hand in hand with our communities. And your point about the cumulative impact of developments is absolutely right and must form part of the planning process.
Great. Neil, do you want to come in?
Thank you, First Minister. I was keen to pick up on all 3 questions briefly, if possible. Firstly, in terms of Balfour's point, just to recognise the critical importance of the tourism sector, regardless of the element within it, to the Scottish economy. I don't need to say that in East Lothian, home of the Golf Coast, and other fantastic attractions. As George said earlier, I was at Archerfield this morning, recognising the important role that tourism and hospitality play within communities as employers, but also within the Scottish economy. And I also recognise from talking to business the importance of not stripping away or cutting back on the important role that planning plays in ensuring we have a regulated approach in local communities, but we provide greater certainty on the speed and provide clarity on the process that people are going through. So the work that the Deputy First Minister has set out, I'm working very closely with Joe Fitzpatrick, recognising the need for looking at what we can do to provide greater certainty in that space. And just building on what Mary has said there in response to your question, Jackie, I think it's absolutely critical that communities that are involved in an earlier stage, that's why we've signed the onshore wind sector deal with the renewable energy sector, and there's a quid pro quo in there. One is about looking to provide greater pace and certainty to the planning and the consenting process, but also making sure that there's an obligation on those developers to consult with communities at a much earlier stage to ensure that the voice that you're looking to have is amplified, but also that there is a more strategic and creative application of the community benefit system. The South of Scotland Enterprise is looking at how it can group together some of those community benefit funds to provide a strategic economic investment in the South of Scotland. I think that's a really good idea, but it has to be done with community ownership and with community benefit and community wealth building in mind. So I absolutely hear you. And in terms of the decisions and how the decisions are taken at a Scottish Government level, all of the considerations that you're talking about, and like Mary, I represent a constituency that has quite a number of onshore wind developments within it. So I understand the concern that is there, and that is absolutely part of the considerations that we take when we take a decision upon any of those schemes. And I'm happy to talk to you about the particular battery application that you're talking about, although obviously the constraints on me talking about a live application you'll understand. And finally, Meg, in terms of small business, the First Minister asked me to tackle the reset of the relationship with the business community across Scotland, understanding that it's critically important for us to have a good economy and a good society working in partnership. And the New Deal for Business is looking to achieve just that. The First Minister set out the support that we are providing through the non-domestic rate system, 100,000 properties taken out through the most generous non-domestic rates relief package for small business anywhere in the UK. But also the finances that we are looking to provide that Shirley-Ann previously spoke about in terms of tackling the cost of living crisis. By supporting low-income households, those are funds that we hope can be spent in local communities, local economies, to ensure that we continue to support the viability of town centres and city centres to continue to thrive. Obviously, the First Minister's already addressed the decision-making powers and where they lie in terms of the particular issue that you've stressed. But I can give you an assurance that we're looking to do everything that we can, recognising the critical importance that the small business sector in particular plays to the Scottish economy to ensure that they can not just survive but can thrive, because we understand the huge role that they play in ensuring that we have a thriving economy as well.
Can I just take kind of First Minister privileges for a minute? I've seen a couple of people raise a kind of placard or piece of paper around flood protection. So can I suggest, George, that we go, I think it's to the Musselburgh Flood Action Group, and yes, there you go, there's a few of them, but I think we'll take one question from the Action Group, and then we're happy to take questions beyond that, but I don't want them to feel that they're not being listened to and heard, and we will keep our responses brief as well, because I realise we're taking up a fair bit of time answering questions too.
It's great that you've seen that. So my name is Neil Armstrong. I live in Fisher Row in Musselburgh, and so there are a lot of people here today, as you can see. So, simple question. Given the twin crisis of climate change and biodiversity loss, do you agree that all flood schemes should be moved to Cycle 2 to allow the issues to be fully factored into the designs? And will you agree with me that it's time to pause the Musselburgh Flood Protection Scheme?
Okay, we'll get another couple of questions on top of that. The gentleman over there in the blue top.
David Hughes, First Minister. And the question that I have is in relation to public services, and you mentioned about fair funding of those. Police Scotland, since the inception, has delivered savings of £200 million a year back to the Scottish Government. And recently the Chief Constable made representations to the Cabinet Secretary for Justice asking for £185 million fair settlement. Police Scotland are currently going through redundancy of 4,000 staff, and I know that recent SNP comments in relation to it are that there are 300 more police officers than since the inception of the current government. However, the officers that are there have backfilled for the police officer, the staff, whose jobs were made redundant. And as a result, there are far less frontline officers. We're on our knees, as are many public services. The Scottish Ambulance Service, last Monday, had 500 calls that were unanswered across Scotland, of which 51 of those at 9 o'clock in the morning were immediate life-saving emergencies that they couldn't dispatch an ambulance to. Could I ask that when it comes to the Finance Secretary and the budget being delivered on the 19th, that a fair settlement is provided to public services, councils, ambulance service and police who are really on our knees and really need help to serve the communities of Scotland? Thank you.
Okay, and the woman in the green shirt there in the right row, or my right, your left.
Thanks. First Minister, on the back of that question around the funding of public services, the Fosside Women and Girls Group, Scottish Women's Budget Group and Making Right Reels tonight are launching our report, the cost of living crisis. I think about it all the time, which looks at the impact of cost of living on women in East Lothian. And what that work shows is that lots of individuals, as you've rightly said, are being affected by the cost of living crisis, but in particular, single parents, disabled women and single households are being really adversely affected. Given that, and given what this research and lots of other research has shown, do you really think that a freeze on council tax is the right way to address and to make sure that the support is getting to the households that actually need it? Particularly given that at East Lothian they've closed the welfare fund to anybody other than those who are most at need for it. So given the financial situation we find us in and your duty to ensure your access and maximum resources, is a council tax freeze really the priority?
What's your name?
I can speak to that.
Sorry, Heather Williams.
Heather.
Okay then, so basically we've got Neil Armstrong from Musselburgh Action Group and about the flood scheme, and David Hughes on public services, particularly the Police Scotland budget, and Heather on the cost of living crisis and how it affects women in East Lothian.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go to Mary on Neil's question in particular. I should give Neil and the others from the Flood Action Group a bit of reassurance that this was something that we discussed with local councillors. Of course, it's a local government decision in relation to whether or not to pause or go ahead. And I believe there's a meeting, I think in the early new year, in the committee, in the relevant committee, at local government. From our perspective, what we try to say to our local government colleagues, and I understand, they tell me that has been done in this case, is look, get the expert advice in relation to physical, in relation to natural protections, to flooding. We've seen and we all understand absolutely the devastation that flooding can cause. We saw that in Storm Babette, of course, in Musselburgh, 3,000 houses potentially that could be impacted by flooding. What we want to see from a government perspective is ensuring that there is the adequate protection. And that's why expert advice absolutely has to be taken on board, as well as, of course, the interests and anxieties of the local community as well. It will ultimately be for that committee to make that decision. But we don't want to see a situation that we saw, for example, in Brecon, and one of my cabinet secretaries lives in Brecon, where we have seen utter devastation because we haven't invested in the flood defence. Now we did in Brecon, we invested heavily in the flood defence, but given that we saw exceptional, extreme weather, in 3 days we saw about a month's worth of rainfall. Those extreme weather events are going to continue to happen, and we've got to make sure that the investment is coming from national government to local government in relation to flooding defences, and that's our primary job, as opposed to telling local government this is the exact flooding defence that you require. But Mary, do you want to come in before I tackle the other questions as well?
Yeah, of course, First Minister. And I can just add a little bit onto that. Firstly, thank you, Neil, for your question, and to all the team. I have seen some correspondence from you all, so I know how strongly you feel about this. I would first of all say, as regards to the cycle prioritisation, that's something that SEPA undertakes, so I'm not going to step on their lawn in that regard. Likewise, as the First Minister said, the project design, which is the stage that the scheme is currently at, is very much something for local authority partners. So likewise, I'm going to defer to them on that. I would say, from my perspective, with national responsibility for these matters, flooding is probably the greatest impact of climate change that we will experience in Scotland, alongside coastal erosion, etc. All of you, particularly those of you involved in this campaign, will be very aware of that. I understand with this scheme that there's about 3,000 folks that are likely to be, maybe 3,000 properties actually, who are expected or who require protection from the scheme, however it comes to fruition. I also understand, again, from the fairly early stages that we're at, that it is already a mixture of engineered solutions, debris catchments, the removal of bridges, etc., have all been considered. I should say, I know that your call... Sorry, I'll just finish the... Sorry, Neil, I'll just finish the answer if... I'll finish the answer if you don't mind, and then I'll come back to you. I am a significant proponent of nature-based solutions to climate change and to catchment level assessment and management. I think that's something we should apply as much as we possibly can. We fund the Eddleston Water Project, who's been looking at that very issue. One of the things that it has come through with is that nature-based solutions to flood mitigation are absolutely important. They can play a really important part. They will often be unable to fully mitigate the risk. And that's why, not commenting on this scheme in particular, but I think a combination of engineered and nature-based solutions is often the best approach. But as I say, we're still at design stage, and you know, there is a chance that at some point in the future this could come to Scottish ministers, so I won't give an opinion either way. But I hope that shows to you that on a sort of national basis, a combination of engineered solutions and nature-based solutions and catchment level management is very much in our flood management objectives. Plus, I should say, really meaningful in community engagement. And on that, Neil, I'll come back to you because I know you had a point.
So I think what we'll do also is, for those that are part of the action group, you're more than welcome to join us at refreshments later on and seek me and Mary out, and indeed colleagues from the council who may well be there, I think will be there as well. Okay.
Okay, well, now's not...
You've made your point.
What we can do is, we can answer government questions, and we'll leave the council to run the council. We get into bother when we start dealing with council stuff.
Yeah. So look, the local councillors, I think, will have heard you, and we'll certainly be at the refreshment area, and you're more than welcome to ask us further questions. Can I go to David's really important point about public services? And I'm speaking as a former Justice Secretary as well. I cannot stress enough just how difficult the settlement is for us in the Scottish Government. And all of you are aware of over 13 years of austerity and what that's meant. I just want to give you one example, because you talked about the NHS, which is, again, not just was I a former Justice Secretary, former Health Secretary. And just to give you an example of how tricky things are, the autumn statement announced by the UK Chancellor means that for next year, for 24-25, we will have £10.8 million coming to the Scottish Government from the UK Government for the NHS. That's sort of a budget that we're spending this year of 19 billion. We're getting 10.8 million in what we call consequentials. Just to put that into perspective, because these numbers sometimes can seem extremely large, Michael, keep me right, that's about 5 hours of activity within the NHS. That's great. We're getting consequentials worth 5 hours of NHS activity from the UK government. So we've got a choice. Do we end up not doing anything on taxation? Do we end up simply using all of the money we get from, for example, business rates relief or tax cuts that have gone to some very wealthy people? Do we do exactly the same as that? Well, if we did that, then the detriment to our public services would be significant. So we've got some really difficult decisions to make before the 19th of December when we announce the budget. What I can give you a guarantee of, without giving away any state secrets, is that the protection of our public services is a top priority for us. Because we know how vital they are. And let me commend Police Scotland. I think they're a phenomenal organisation who have demonstrated how you do reform. Not easily, it's been difficult, it's been through some pain. We absolutely accept that. But can I just give you the example of this financial year, which in itself has been difficult, 23-24. We funded the police to the tune of an extra, I think, about 80-odd million pounds, a 6.4% increase. And what we've tried to do and tried to say to the Chief Constable is, look, it's for you to determine how you choose to use that budget. We'll not put a magic number on it. And frankly, we used to do that and say, you've got to keep police numbers above 17,234. What we'll say this time round is, of course, we want to see in Scotland, as we already do, more bobbies in the beat per person than other parts of the UK. We want to make sure the outcomes are that we see safer communities, and we've seen crime at one of its lowest recorded levels in almost 50 years. But what your points about backfilling are so well made, and ones that the Justice Secretary, the Minister here who's for Community Safety, the Cabinet Secretary for Justice couldn't be here, will take on board, and we'll take on board for the budget. The very last thing I wanted to say in relation to Heather's question which is really really good points that were made. And Shona can talk in a moment to budgeting and gendered budgeting, gendered approach to budgeting, is protecting people during the cost of living crisis, again, is right up there in terms of our priorities. I, as a constituency MSP, and I've been an MSP in one form or another in the Scottish Parliament for over 12 years, I have never seen the number of people on what you might describe as above average salaries coming into my constituency office in real pain and suffering because they're struggling to pay their energy bills or to keep up with the mortgage payments or the rental payments or, devastatingly, even feed their family. And that's astonishing that we're facing that level of suffering. And actually, though people in this stage had nothing to do with it because we've got a government that has created such economic devastation. So our job is to make sure that we protect people. Now, I don't have the levers over every bill. I can't control energy prices. It's not in my hand. I can't control mortgage prices. Not in my hand. I can control some bills, though. And that's why I think the council tax freeze is absolutely important, because it's one bill that I can absolutely control, or we can control, if we fully fund the council tax freeze. And you may not agree with it, and I can see you don't, that's fine. But it is a choice for us to make of fully funding the council tax freeze. And I've had a good conversation with our colleagues in local government, and we'll continue to do so with COSLA, which says, look, if you're going to freeze the council tax, so people's bill doesn't increase by 5 or 10%, as we saw in some local authority areas this year, during a cost of living crisis, then we've got to make sure that's fully funded, and that's a decision, that's a conversation that we're absolutely committed to having. Because I think it is exceptionally important that where we do have levers, we make decisions to help people during a cost of living crisis. So anything, Siobhan, you wish to add around the policing side of things?
No, I just want to recognise the importance of our public services, and I think although we've had 13 years of austerity, every year the policing budget has increased with an 80 million last year. So we do totally appreciate our public services and keeping there to keep our community safe. So the budget's next week, so we'll just have to wait to see what's announced.
Yeah, I should say also, when it comes to council tax, of course, people on lower income spend a significantly higher proportion of their income on council tax than, for example, people who are wealthy. But you want to come in on budgeting?
Yeah, I mean, on the point about the autumn statement, I think if you listen to the independent commentators like the OBR, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, the Resolution Foundation, they're all saying the same, and that is that it's an autumn statement and a budget that is funding tax cuts at the expense of investment in public services. Now, without giving any trade secrets away before the budget on the 19th, I think it's fair to say that it's not our instinct to follow Tory spending plans, but that it brings its own challenges, because when you have a series of difficult decisions to make, we can't mitigate everything across the whole of the public sector. So that will mean difficult decisions. It will mean doing things differently, public bodies working more closely together, which they should be doing anyway, but we're going to have to see more of that. And actually the police and fire service, I think, are an example of reform that has been important in terms of some of the delivery of a 40-year low in recorded crime, and that's a tribute to everybody working front line of policing and the support staff as well. On the Women's Budget Group, you'll be reassured that Professor Angela O'Hagan spoke to Cabinet about the importance of the work of the Women's Budget Group. So if you look at the investments that the Scottish Government has made over the years, things like childcare, we've still got work to do, but it is one of the best offers in these islands, but we recognise the importance of it for women and for the economy, actually. If you look at the Scottish Child Payment and the cost of living crisis, literally helping families keep food on the table and their heads above water has been a game changer. And most the poverty organisations will say that. They'll want us to go further and do more, but they recognise that it is a game changer. So we're not saying everything we've done is perfect and all of our policies are the right ones and you're right to challenge us. All I'm saying is that in tough times, we're going to be guided by the things that are really, really important and helping people at these really difficult times. And our public services will remain the core priority for this government.
Okay. Moving on, this gentleman over here.
Hi, good afternoon. My name's Alan Munro. Just a very quick question to help my understanding of an issue. My understanding is that the house building programme in Scotland is directed by the Scottish Government. It's carried out locally via your local authority. So what I hear is we're going to build more houses in East Lothian, we're building more houses in East Lothian, but I also hear the council saying our council tax doesn't cover all the costs of the infrastructure it has to go in there and deliver services. So there seems to be a dichotomy here. So we get more houses, does it create more jobs? The concern I have, and the lady explained it earlier on, is that we're now talking about something as minimal as parking charges in North Berwick that could damage businesses. Years ago in Scotland, we had a business birth rate strategy where we were encouraging people into business. If we are now going down the route of charging inappropriately, are we going to create a business death rate strategy? Is that the plan?
Okay, can we have another couple of questions? That gentleman there with the mask and the grey shirt.
Thank you. My name is Matt Beeston. I want to ask a question about support or lack of for people with long COVID. The background to this, my wife is one of the, I think, in the hundreds of thousands of people in Scotland who are suffering with long COVID. She's been essentially disabled for since March 2022, no longer able to work or parent effectively or live a kind of full and active life. So obviously we've lost her income through this period of cost of living crisis as well. She's struggled to get access to treatment because of, well, obviously she's looking to get something as simple as a COVID booster vaccination, but because long COVID is not listed as a qualifying condition, the NHS has refused to even give her access to that basic treatment. My question is, can that be justified?
Okay, can I also, was it your name Mark, did you say? Matt. Matt, okay. Moving on, there was a hand up here down in the front row, or second row.
Hi, my name's Finlay. I'm from North Park High School. Given the national tragedy of drug deaths, I know the Scottish Government is implementing plans on safe consumption rooms, but given the limited levers the Scottish Government has, how hopeful are you that things like decriminalisation and harm reduction, which can't currently be implemented, how hopeful are you that you can actually work together with the UK Government to bring in these things that are so necessary right now? Or is there a risk that things like this, which are not currently devolved, could turn into another constitutional bun fight, if you like?
No, what an excellent question. What was your name?
Finlay. Basically, First Minister, Alan Munro was asking about home building programme, council tax in the area, and also there was a part about business there as well. And Matt was talking about his wife and the situation with long COVID and support. And we've also got Finlay there talking about the national tragedy of drug deaths and how we feel we can move things forward.
Okay. Ashley Ann, to come in housing, I should say one of the discussions we had with Norman and the council team was in relation to something called Section 75s. So there is the ability, of course, to ask house builders, contractors to contribute funds towards local amenities, such as local health centres. The point the local council was making to me was they feel they have to jump through too many hoops in order to get those contributions. So the DFM and I, Deputy First Minister and I, promised to go away and look at how we make that issue easier, that process easier in relation to Section 75s, so that contributions, we can ensure that developers are making contributions to local amenities and local services. But I'll go to Shirley Ann if she's got anything to add on housing, although Paul McLennan, your MSP Housing Minister too. I'll go to Shirley Ann, and then Neil might want to come in the business front before I come to Matt's question and Finlay's question. Shirley Ann.
Well, I was going to talk about Section 75 as well, but you beat me to it. But what I will say is it's very clear that local government and national government need to work together. I know you're hearing that a lot today, but that is true in so many circumstances, house building being one of them. It's not dictated to by the centre. Clearly, the local housing needs and the local needs of an area are something for a local authority to work on, and then that is a discussion then that's had with a national government about the funding that's available to it. But the First Minister quite rightly points out to the importance of Section 75 and ensuring that we're dealing with the house building and the planning together, because we need to learn very, very carefully from mistakes that have gone on way decades ago. And I speak from the new city of Dunfermline, which also has enormous house building, where we had the experiences of the houses and not the infrastructure being built when Dunfermline started to increase in size well over a decade ago, and we need to make sure that we're not repeating those same mistakes. So that ability for the council to work very seriously at looking not just of the house building needs but of the infrastructure and community needs, so that you're building a community rather than building houses, is absolutely integral to the way that the planning system should work, but it's for the local authority to be able to adapt that to its needs as and when.
Thanks very much. Briefly, Neil.
Just to say, just to give assurance that we are investing to provide support for the ongoing sustainability of businesses. That is obviously where we provide our investment through our enterprise agencies and other colleagues. But actually, the point that you raised about a Scottish business birth strategy, we're working very closely with our Chief Entrepreneur, Mark Logan, as well as Anna Stewart in this space to try to ensure that we are seeing once again a growth in Scottish business startups, and also the finance is there in order to sustain and scale those businesses to continue to grow. We've got really strong networks, developing the TechScaler network and others to ensure that we are providing the support in key areas of innovation across the economy. So just to give that reassurance to Alan that we are investing in that space to sustain ongoing sustainability of our businesses, but also to see greater numbers of startups and from a more diverse position, ensuring that we're unleashing the prospect of the economic prospect of more women being involved in business startups, for example.
Thanks. Look, to Matt's point, I'm really sorry to hear about what your wife has been going through. I've met many people who themselves have suffered from long COVID or have family members. In fact, I've got a family member who suffers from long COVID, a very immediate family member, and it's horrible to see that level of deterioration in the health and tough for a family, particularly when they're not able to work. And that's why it's really important that we do what we can to provide a social security system that acts as a safety net where that happens. Can I suggest, and I'll come to the Health Secretary in a minute, can I suggest that even if you're not around for refreshments at the end, if we take some of your details in a bit more detail if it was, so we can come back to you in terms of some of the substantial points that you make. I've seen some really good examples in health boards where the long COVID rehabilitation is working well. So if I give you one example, it'd be NHS Lanarkshire. They've got a long COVID rehabilitation team. I met one individual who was suffering really poorly from long COVID to the point that if she took a shower, she told me she was exhausted for the rest of the day, totally exhausted and unable to do anything else. Now, through the rehabilitation, which is effectively as a one-stop shop, you had a multidisciplinary team. You had the nutritionist, the dietitian, you had the physiotherapist, you had the consultant, you had nurses, you had the whole team working on this one individual's case and was able to provide them with the appropriate treatment that they required. It sounds like to me you're not getting that from NHS Lothian. Yeah, so that's concerning to me. So let us take that away and get your details, but let's also, Michael, take that away with NHS Lothian, because we have given additional funding to health boards around long COVID. We've not dictated to them, like, this is what you have to do. A lot of people talk about kind of long COVID clinics. I have to say the jury's really out on them, because what we've seen a lot of long COVID clinics is a lot of referrals go to the clinics and then nothing happens post the referral to the clinic. But we'll take your details if you don't mind, Matt, and we'll come back to you in more detail, because I think the point is absolutely well made. And we'll look into the issue. I think we should look into the issue around vaccinations as well, because that point's well made. Finlay's points on drugs deaths, it's a really good question. I can give you an absolute guarantee that on particular issues like drugs deaths, and I put the climate crisis in this, we don't want to be fighting with the UK government. We'd rather be on the same page as the UK government, because there's a win-win for everybody in all this. The levels of drug deaths in Scotland is unacceptably high. And we've beginning to see some level of improvement, but even at that level of improvement, even at that cautious, optimistic signs that we're seeing, it's still far too high. And we know what we've been doing alone isn't working. So we've got to be able to try new things, such as the carriage of naloxone is one example. And David was talking about the police officers before. They've done a tremendous job in the carriage of naloxone as one example. So, and safe consumption rooms we absolutely want to push ahead with. And now we think we have the ability to do so, given the recent decisions by the Lord Advocate in relation to prosecution policy. So our colleagues in Glasgow City Council, I think they've identified now a site potentially for a safe consumption room, and we'll take forward that discussion with the UK government. And climate's the same. And climate, you know, there's lots of issues. You know, UK government, Scottish government, we can trade blows on and come to differences, talk robustly about our differences in that regard. But the climate shouldn't really be one of them. We all know that we have to take action, and it doesn't do anybody any good, certainly not our planet, to make the climate crisis issue one that becomes politicised. It doesn't do anybody any good whatsoever. Michael, do you want to add anything to the point about Matt's points? And then I don't know if anybody else wants to come in on drugs deaths.
Look, thanks, Matt, for your question. Again, I'm sorry to hear the challenges that your wife's having on that. One of the things that we have asked boards to do is, with the additional funding we've provided to them, is to design services which are very much patient-centred. Part of the challenge around long COVID is that long COVID covers a wide range of different types of presentations in patients, which means that designing a single patient pathway and the way in which the First Minister referenced, like long COVID clinics, isn't often the appropriate way in which to do that. We need to take a holistic approach, have a multidisciplinary team who can actually deal with the different types of presentation that they get with an individual around long COVID. And that's what we've asked boards to do, and I'm more than happy to look into the issue around NHS Lothian and the approach that they're taking on that. Like the First Minister, I've witnessed some very good services that are being provided by some of our health boards, but we have given them direction to that, and we look for them to try and take that forward. And on the issue around the presentation for vaccination programmes, the vaccination programme is designed on the advice of the Joint Vaccination Committee, who make recommendations on those who should be vaccinated and those who have got pre-existing conditions, which of those conditions should be classified, etc., as being part of the programme. And that's how we apply that to our national vaccination programme. Sorry, you want to come in? Yeah. Yeah, of course.
Which that decision is made by the Joint Committee on Vaccinations. Apologies. The policy is essentially decided based on the premise that it's there to protect the NHS and prevent what's, I guess, referred to as severe illness and deaths. So basically, people are going to turn up in hospital, which probably made sense to my mind at the start of the pandemic, when there was real threat to the NHS from this. But at this stage, when the threat is to people who are losing livelihoods, perhaps that could be extended slightly to recognise that there's a wider impact. You know, to turn somebody away who's ill and suffering, and say, sorry, you haven't turned up a hospital, you're not costing us money, so we're not going to vaccinate you, seems fundamentally wrong.
Sure, but the best thing would be is to maybe get a wee bit more detail about your wife's situation, we can look into that for you. I think it goes back to the point I was making earlier on about the term long COVID. It covers a wide range of different presentations, which from a vaccination point of view creates some challenges around who should get it, who shouldn't get it. And that's part of just where we are with the understanding of long COVID in its presentation. But can I just finish this point, if you don't mind? We can get details afterwards and we can look into it. But the programme we do operate is based upon the clinical advice that we receive from the Joint Vaccination Committee around who should be vaccinated and in what that form of programme should be in order to maximise protection both for the NHS but also to maximise protection for communities and those who are most vulnerable within our community. There will always be elements within the system where individuals, would you call it, that the system doesn't quite match up to their experience and their needs as well. And that's where individual clinical advice should be taken the matter. But we can get the details of the situation for your wife, and we can follow that up for you as well.
Can either get the details later on, or if you want to have a chat with the CABSEC when we have a cup of tea later on, might be the best bet. One final question, because we're rapidly running out of time. That was my private office telling me to roll it up there at that point. I was going to go for two, but I've been told one only. So I'll go for the young woman here at the front.
Hi, I'm Chloe Mitchell from Preston Lodge High School, and I was wondering, what's your stance on ensuring fair and humane treatment for asylum seekers in Scotland?
Okay, First Minister.
It's a cracker of a question to end on. Look, for me, I am somebody who is the product of immigration. So my grandfather came here in the 1960s, and he was asked actually to come here. The British made an appeal at that point because there were shortages of bus drivers, shortages of factory workers, and so he came here. And like most immigrant stories, he worked his backside off. He sent money to Pakistan, where he came from. He kept some money here to put his kids through university, my dad being one of them. He then eventually opened up his own business, my grandfather. He employed local people. And even though my grandfather's passed on, his wife still has that, almost 50 years later, still has that same shop in Mayfield in Edinburgh to this very day. And throughout the 50 years, or almost 50 years, they've employed probably hundreds of people, contributed lots in tax. And that is very typical of migrants right across the UK, and I would say probably right across the world. That every study under the sun, bar none, shows that migrants contribute more than they take. Now, we are facing, although you're seeing a lot of growth in population here in East Lothian, in Scotland more generally, we're seeing huge workforce vacancies. And you're seeing them in East Lothian, I have to say, too. Huge workforce vacancies in the public and private sector. We've got an ageing population. And yet, somehow, for these countries that young people want to come here to work, we're stopping them from coming here. And that, to me, seems economically illiterate, let alone what it means morally. And I suppose on asylum, which is slightly different, is all of us, I think, can't help but be moved by some of the atrocious scenes of conflict that we've seen right across the world over the last few years. And Scots, and people across the UK, not just Scots, those in England and Wales and Northern Ireland, are very generous people. And we saw that when it came to the conflict and current illegal invasion of Ukraine. Look how many Scots opened up their homes to allow Ukrainians to come stay with them, to be part of their families. That, to me, is the Scotland and, I would say, the UK that I really am proud of, that generosity of spirit. And goodness forbid, if ever we needed shelter and needed accommodation, I would hope the rest of the world would look to accommodate us and give us safe sanctuary. I think it says a lot about a nation and a country that when people are fleeing persecution, that you open your arms and your hearts and your homes. I think it says a lot about a country that's willing to do that. That doesn't mean asylum doesn't have an impact on local services. Of course it does. It's got to be mindful about housing, about health, about public services. But ultimately, as I say, those who come to this country from abroad often tend to contribute more than they take. And the final point I'd make on this particular issue is I think all of us have a responsibility, perhaps going back to Finley's question, I think all of us have a responsibility to take the heat out of the debate around asylum and immigration and talk really about the facts of the matter, as I've tried to do. Because ultimately, we end up stigmatising people who are already suffering immeasurably. And if you want to tackle illegal migration, which we should, the point is you should create legal migration. And the problem with legal routes, apart from the Ukrainian scheme, apart from a very, very limited scheme for Afghans, there's virtually no legal way of claiming asylum to this country. And that to me is unacceptable. So I think the current, and we're going to get a vote, or I say the House of Commons will get a vote tomorrow on the so-called Rwanda bill, which I have to say is probably the most repugnant piece of legislation to ever enter the House of Commons. What we need to do as politicians is lead from the front, absolutely acknowledge people's concerns about immigration and asylum, because many of them are very legitimate, but lead from the front in saying that this country, for decades, has benefited from migration, and actually migrants make our country better, not poorer, in every single way, economically, culturally, academically, through their cuisine, I might suggest, as well. And that is something to be celebrated, not castigated. So thank you very much for that excellent question.
No, thank you. And if I can bring everything to an end now, I think we've had a really good selection of questions there. We got a real idea of what are the issues for yourselves here in East Lothian. And there was a great mix of questions as well. I feel we managed to get quite a lot of people, but no doubt there'll be those of you that will tell me when we go for a coffee afterwards that perhaps I never got you in for your question, but I'm quite happy, as are my colleagues, to talk to anyone. So it only leaves for me to say thank you to everyone here in East Lothian who has looked after us today and made us feel so welcome and enjoyed this meeting here today as well. And thank you for all of that, and thank you for your questions as well, and hopefully we see you again not too distant future. Thank you.